In the 5th episode of this tutorial series, we'll be setting up our camera and lighting the scene using Volumetrics. This is where our render really starts coming to life. If you find yourself enjoying this tutorial, consider checking out my premium classes on Skillshare. I'm excited that I can offer everyone a completely free month of premium Skillshare membership by using the link in the description and comments below. I have 9 unique classes focused on many different aspects of Blender, like my Model a Gnome class. With that out of the way, let's proceed with the tutorial. Before we start placing our camera, let's clean up our file so that it's a little bit more organized than it is now. Right now we have everything in a single collection, and everything is named, but we have our lights mixed with our cameras and our ground, so let's do a better job of collecting these into more obvious collections. We'll start with selecting all of the pieces of our portal. So there's a few different ways we can do this. Luckily the portal is relatively easy to select in the viewport, so one of the easiest ways to do it in this case would just be to kind of rotate your viewport down. And we're just going to drag select over top of every piece here to select all parts of our portal. Now we can double check that we have everything selected here on the list on the right side. Now with everything selected, we can hit M on our keyboard for Move to Collection, and then we can choose New Collection. Now it'll ask us what we want this new collection to be called. We're just going to call it Portal, since it contains all of the parts of our portal. And then we can hit OK. So now we can see over here on the right side, it's taken all the pieces that we had currently selected and dropped them into this new collection called Portal. So we can collapse this and you can see all the portal parts are now inside this portal collection. These collections over here in our scene collection are essentially just folders within inside Blender. So it allows us to organize our file a little bit better. It also lets us do things like hide entire parts of our model, assuming they're within a collection. So we can just turn off this little checkbox here, and it'll hide the entirety of the portal, and it'll hide this collection associated with it as well. To turn it back on, we would just turn on this little checkbox, and that turns it back. You can also do things like hide an object from just the viewport, so you can do this with either the collection or just a single object. So if you wanted to hide it only in the viewport but not in the render, you could click the little eyeball here. So by doing this, this object will not show in the viewport, but if we hit the render button, it will still show up in the render. We can also turn that back on and then turn off the rendered viewport, or the rendered view rather. So if we have this turned off, now it will show up in the viewport, but it will not show up in our render. If you ever have a situation where you're pretty sure something should be showing and it isn't, or vice versa, check these symbols here first. This might be the reason why your object is or is not showing in the render. So I'm just going to turn both of these back on and make sure that this checkbox is turned on as well. Now let's put the last 2 pieces of this scene into its own collection, and that's going to be the ground plane and then the cobblestones. So we can either just drag select over them in the viewport like this, and select just these objects. And we can double check that we only have them selected here in this list, make sure nothing else is highlighted. Or you could select them from the list by either selecting the first one, and then holding Control and selecting the next one, or if it was a longer list, such as if we were doing this for the portal, you could select the very top one and then hold Shift and select the bottom one, and it'll select everything between. So in our case, we just need to have the cobblestone, and then I'll hold Control and select the ground as well. Now we can hit M on our keyboard, choose New Collection, then we can name this. We're going to call it Environment. So we have that named, and then we can hit OK. We'll see once again over here in our list, it's moved these 2 objects into their own collection. And now the very last collection we need to do is already created essentially for us. We're just going to use the default one. Rather than adding the camera and the light to its own new collection, it's already in one, so we'll just rename this collection. We're going to name it just that, Camera and Lights. So I'm going to double click the word collection, and then rename it Camera and Lights. Okay, so now it's pretty obvious what objects should go into each one of these collections to keep our file nice and organized. Now after renaming this collection, you'll notice that this little white box, this kind of like file symbol, or folder symbol I guess it would be, next to this has a little kind of faint white highlight around it. It has like a little faint glow around it in a box. And that's telling you which one of these collections is currently your default collection. So if I click on this little white box for the portal, Now this is the default collection. And what that means is basically any new object I create. So if I hit Shift and A and create a new object, it will automatically go into the current default collection. So if in this case, if I make a cube, it's going to pop up right into the portal collection. It won't just go into the base kind of root scene collection. So I'm going to delete this cube. And in our case, for the camera and the lighting, we're going to make the camera and lights the default collection. That way, any lights we make, or if we do anything to the camera, it's going to start automatically in the correct collection. This isn't a super big deal to remember, but it'll make your life a little bit easier if you remember, okay, I'm going to be working on the portal now. I'm going to make the portal the default collection, and then anything new I create will just go right there. It'll automatically be organized for me. So let's switch back to our default collection for the camera and lights by clicking on the little white folder icon, and now we're ready to place our camera. If you haven't done this already, you can switch to your layout workspace, which is basically like the default workspace. And then you can also switch to your rendered viewport mode, which is the furthest right bubble here. So you might, if you just open this file up from default, it might look like this, and this is the shaded view. So you can just click this little bubble here and it'll switch it to the rendered view instead. So the first thing we're going to need to do is to make a new viewport that we're going to devote just to the camera view. And we can do that by going up here to the top left. We're going to hover over this top left corner of the viewport until it turns into a plus sign, our mouse. And then we can just click and drag to the right to drag out a brand new viewport. Now on this viewport over here, we're going to click the little camera icon. And then at the top, we'll notice that we can't actually see this full bar anymore. And that's because it's basically being cut off by the side because we've cut this whole viewport in half. So to see this, we're going to click our middle mouse button in. So click in your mouse wheel, and that allows you to pan this bar over. So let's pan it all the way over to the right, and then we can choose our rendered view. If you're doing this tutorial on a weaker or maybe an older computer, you might not want to have both of these viewports set to rendered. So in that case, make sure you leave the left one set to rendered because that's what our viewport for the camera is going to look like. And then this right one, we can use our middle mouse button, click it in and pan it over so we can see these bubbles again. And then we can just switch this to the shaded viewport. So this will be a little less taxing on your computer. For this tutorial, I'll probably just leave this right one as shaded as well. Now over here on the left side, we can now see through our camera's view, and it's not a great view of our portal. So let's reposition it. There are a couple ways you can move your camera around your scene. I'll show you two examples first, so you know how they work, and then in the final example, I'll show you the exact placement of the camera for this tutorial if you want to follow along with me. Over here on our right viewport, the shaded one, we can zoom out so we can see our camera. In this case, it's right here. It should be up to the kind of top right of your portal. If you've accidentally deleted this camera, that's no problem. You can just hit Shift and A, and then we can add a new camera by going down here to the bottom and then just choosing camera. And that'll place a brand new camera here, right dead center in your scene. I wouldn't worry about it not being the same position as our original one because we're going to move this anyway, but this is how you would add in a brand new camera. If you had to add a new camera because you deleted your old one, you might also need to click this button here again on the left viewport to jump into the view of the newly added camera. I'm going to delete this new camera though because I don't need it in this case. So I'm going to go back and select the original camera that started in our scene. And now we're going to change some of these settings here to get it in a better place before we start positioning it. So let's go down here to the bottom right, and we're going to choose the object data properties for our camera. So this will allow us to change the settings. And the first thing we're going to change is the focal length. So right now it's defaulted to 50. We're going to type in 200 for ours, and then hit enter. You'll notice right away that it's zoomed in the view of our camera, but it's also done something kind of essentially like flattening the view. So we're doing this to give it a little bit more of a stylized look. We want it to have a bit more of a flat, sort of cartoony look. And the higher we make this number, one, the more zoomed in it's going to be, but it's also going to sort of perceptually flatten our view. It'll be a little bit less perspective distorted and a little bit flatter. So now let's talk about the first method of moving this camera around. So the first way to do it would just be to use your move tool. So you can just select your camera, and on this right viewport, you'll find it a lot easier. You can just move the camera around, and you can see as you move it, this left view automatically updates. Now it's a relatively easy way to quickly move the camera, but you can see how it'd be a little bit tedious to have to switch back and forth between your tools and kind of eye it up, and then, okay, you need to move it back now. And it's just a lot of switching back and forth and trying to get it to line up to something that's often the distance especially is rather difficult, especially with this pretty high focal length. I find this easily to be the most tedious method of placing our camera. The next method is actually my preferred method, which is using a tool called Camera to View. So to do that, you're going to go over here on our left side viewport. We can hit N to bring up the side menu. And then we're going to go down here to the View tab. And then this bar here, it's actually cut off a little bit. So this little checkbox here under View Lock, if we check Camera to View, and then hit N to hide this side menu, now on this left viewport, if we just use our normal sort of viewport navigation controls, we'll see that it actually moves our camera with it. So I find this a lot easier to position our camera in the place that we want it, because it's just how we're used to doing this anyway. This doesn't feel too alien. We're not having to look over here and switch back and forth between tools and then look over at the left view and see how it lines up. We can just basically line up our camera using the edge of the frame here as a guide and just get a view that we like. This camera to view setting is easily my favorite way to place my camera, and that's actually how I decided the camera angle for this tutorial. One important thing to note though, with the camera to view setting, you have to remember to bring back up that side menu and uncheck this box when you're done moving your camera. Otherwise, you might accidentally move your camera left or right or rotate it or something by accident because you still had that setting on. You can see once we turn that off, we can't actually rotate the camera. As soon as we try to rotate like we were before, it just hops you outside of the camera. So we'll have to click this little button here to jump back into it. Having that setting turned off though does allow us to zoom in on our camera and pan it left and right and kind of fill this viewport though. So there is a reason to have it turned off even when you're using the camera to viewport, mainly because you don't want to accidentally move your camera, but it also allows you to zoom in without actually moving your camera forward. The last method I'll be showing you now is to just type in the exact values for the camera placement. This isn't a typical method for camera placement because there wouldn't really be a way for you to know these values prior to placing your camera first. It might be useful for you though if you know exactly where you want your camera to be, say in an exact height or an exact distance from an object, but it's not the typical way that you'd be setting up a camera. So to do this, we can just go over here on either of the viewports, but we'll do it on the right side this time. So I'm going to hit N to bring up my side menu, and then make sure you're in your item tab. So we want to be changing some of these settings here. And I still have my camera selected, so it's showing the position and rotation of our current camera. And then I'm going to be typing in these values. So if you just want to follow along, starting from the top, the X location, we can type in 12 meters. The Y location is negative 25.7 meters. The Z location is 1.25 meters. And now we can adjust the rotations. So the rotation is actually, it was already arbitrarily set there, but we'll be setting this to 88 for the X. The Y we can set to 0. And then the Z we'll set to 25 degrees. And then hit enter. So you can see after typing in all these values, we now have a nice sort of centered up and pleasing angle for this camera. With our camera placed, let's move on to the depth of field. So with your camera still selected, we can go over here to the object data properties. Then we can scroll down here and we're going to check on this box here that says depth of field, which will just enable the depth of field on the camera. And now we can see over here, our camera is now blurry because of the depth of field has been turned on. Make sure you have your settings twirled open so you can see them all. And then we're going to click this little eyedropper here. And we're going to choose the actual portal object. So this big glowing circle, the portal. And we're just going to click on that. And that will set that as the focus object. So it's going to choose that object and then make things blurry from, in front of and behind that object. Now let's determine how blurry this actually is. And we can do that with the f-stop value. So right now it's defaulted to 2.8, which there's really hardly any blurring going on here. So we're going to set our value really low because we're going for a pretty stylized look. We're going to set ours to 0.3 and then hit enter. And we can see after doing that, now we get some really harsh blurring here in the foreground. and then also in the background as well. Now the background's not going to matter too much once we get to the lighting, because that's going to be pretty much total darkness behind the portal. But the stuff in the foreground we will notice, and it does look pretty nice, that has these kind of blurred out, kind of fuzzy looking cobblestones, and then as it gets closer to the portal, it starts getting sharper. Depending on how far apart your portal bubbles are, you might also notice some of your furthest or closest portal bubbles also have a little bit of a blurry edge to them, which helps just give them a little bit of realism. As I mentioned before, this f-stop value down here that we just changed to 0.3 is essentially what dictates how blurry the object is going to be. A large number means we have a wide depth of field, so very little will be blurry within our render. A small number, which is what we have now, means we have a very shallow depth of field, so a lot of our image will be blurry outside of that focal depth. And currently we're having our focal depth set by the focus object. So we've chose this portal, so it's putting that portal right in the middle of the focal depth, and then it's blurring things in front of that portal as well as things behind that portal. With the depth of field done and the camera placed, let's begin the lighting process. We're going to start by turning off all of this ambient lighting that we have in the scene right now. That's where we're getting this kind of gray sky from, as well as the fact that we can still see some lighting even in the shadow areas of our portal. So to do this, we're going to go over here to the world properties. It's this little red globe icon. We can click this, and then for our strength, we're just going to turn this all the way down to 0. So you can either type in 0 or just drag it down to 0. And we can see now this is much darker here. We pretty much see nothing in the background, and the only light that we're seeing is actually this default light that we had placed in our scene originally, as well as the glow of the portal itself. Now over here on your right viewport, select this light that we had left in our scene. Again, if you've deleted this since we last entered it in, you can just hit Shift and A, and then go to light and add in a point light. If you already have it in your scene though, this one's fine. Now let's go up to our collection here, and we're going to rename this light so we know what it's doing. We're going to call this rim light. R-I-M, and then light. Okay, and then the purpose of this light is we're going to be placing this behind our portal, and it's going to be providing kind of this kind of glowing rim on the inside of the portal in the back. We're going to be hiding it behind this, and it'll be glowing on the inside of the bottom of the stones here, at the bottom here, and then it'll illuminate behind the portal as well. So with this light selected, we can now hit Alt and G at the same time. And all that does is just move it down to the origin of the scene, which is, in this case, right in the center of our portal. So it's right where these red and green lines converge. Now that it's centered out, we can just move it behind the portal. So we're going to move it back here, away from where the cobblestones are. And we're going to move it roughly about 0.3 meters behind. So up at the top here, you can either see it from the move tool at the bottom. We're going to move it about 0.3 meters behind the portal, which is actually in the positive direction. So you can type in 0.3 here, or if you still have your side menu up, you can do it there as well. Now let's change the settings on this light. So we can go over here to our object data properties. It looks like a little green light bulb icon now. And let's start by changing the color. So to change the color, you just click on this color bar here. And then let's start changing these numbers here. So for our hue, we're going to type in 0.02 and then hit enter. And we notice it doesn't change anything about the color because we don't have any saturation right now. So we're just going to turn the saturation all the way up to 100%, set it up to 1. And now we can see it has a nice kind of glow, sort of orange glow that's mimicking the color of our portal. Now let's make this light a lot brighter. We're going to set this from 1000 all the way up to 4000. So 4000 for your power. You can see it's now a lot brighter back there. And then we're also going to increase the radius. So the radius is basically just saying how large is this light source. The smaller the light source is, the sharper your shadows are going to be. And then the larger the light source is, the more soft and kind of muted your shadows will be. So we're going to make this a little bit bigger so the shadows aren't quite so sharp. We're just going to set it to 0.25 meters and then hit enter. While we're getting the illumination that we wanted, we also noticed that the light orb is actually visible through the portal itself, which looks kind of bad. Luckily, this is pretty easy to fix. So to fix this, we just need to go to our object properties over here with our light selected. So we still have the rim light selected. We're going to click on this one here, which is object properties. It's also just kind of like a little orange square with brackets around it. And now we can scroll down to visibility. Scroll even further down. And then underneath ray visibility, we're going to uncheck transmission. So you'll see as soon as we uncheck this, that white circle we were seeing in the middle of our portal has disappeared. So basically we're just telling it to not show through transmissive objects. And we'll remember earlier on when we were doing our texturing for this portal, we made this object transmissive. We set the transmission value all the way up to 1 so that light passes through this. Now by unchecking this, we're basically just telling the light, don't show itself through transmissive objects. So we still get all the illumination we want, but we don't have to worry about seeing the actual light source through this glassy, so to speak, portal. Now that we've added our first light to the scene, let's add something called Volumetrics so that our lights actually glow and provide more than just illumination to the scene. We'll do this over here on the World Properties tab. So again, it's this little red icon with the kind of globe symbol. Now we can twirl open Volume, and here we see it says None. So we're just going to set a volume in here. So we'll click the word None, and then we can choose Principled Volume. And we'll select that, and we'll see right away, as soon as we select it, our whole scene turns black. And that's because the scene currently has so much fog in the scene that we can't see through it. So we need to adjust some of these parameters to allow us to see through the fog. The two main things we need to change are the density and the anisotropy. So first, let's change the density. Right now it's set to 1. We're going to lower it a lot. We're going to set it all the way down to 0.05 and then hit enter. And now we can see that we can actually see our portal and that the fog density is much lower. But we also notice now that this light that we put behind our portal is doing this cool kind of foggy glow behind the portal. And that's really the whole point of adding these volumetrics to our scenes. We give our lights a little bit more body, a little more presence within the scene. So they actually look like they're kind of filling and illuminating the air within the scene. Next, let's change the anisotropy value. This one's kind of a weird word that doesn't mean a whole lot to most people, but basically the higher we make this number, the more concentrated the fog will be around our light source. So it'll be really bright around the light source, and then it will have a little bit less of this kind of generic, just general fog glow that we're seeing. So we're going to raise our number up just a little bit. We're going to set it to 0.5. And we'll see as we do this, the edges of our frame get a little bit darker, but the light source, the glowing from the light source is kind of staying a little bit more contained to the portal itself. This concentration of the fog around the light source would just get more and more intense as we increase this value. So the higher the value, the more confined the fog is to basically just around your light sources. The volume we added did a great job of making our single light in our scene a lot more impactful and just kind of fill the scene better. So let's add 2 more lights to our scene to kind of finish out this lighting. So over here on our right viewport, we can now hit Shift and A to bring up our add menu. We're going to go to light, and then this time we're going to add a spotlight. Over here in our list, we're going to double click where it says spot, and we're going to call this overhead light. Now let's go down to the object data properties, this little green light bulb icon, and we're going to start by changing the color. So let's click this white bar. We'll set our saturation to 0.95, so it's almost entirely saturated. And now let's change the color. We're going to make this blue. So we're going to set this to a 0.6 for the hue and then hit enter. Now let's go down here and change the power. We're going to make this way, way brighter. We can set this to 50,000. So 50 and then 000 and then hit enter. Let's change the radius. We're going to set that to 1 meter. So we're making it a good bit larger than the other light was. So it'll have softer shadows overall. And then there's 2 more settings that we need to change down here. Let's move our light up a little bit just into a temporary position so we can get a better idea of what these settings do. So in our right viewport, let's just move this light up above, just right in the Z value. The first thing we'll change here is the spot size. And that basically just changes how large is this cone. So basically we can make it a lower value and it'll make it a lot more of a pinpoint light, so really, really narrow. Or we make it really big, and it makes it a really wide light, almost until it basically goes flat. So it's just, at this point, it's just a really large disc that's shooting light straight down. So we don't need it nearly this large. We're going to set ours to 60. So 60, hit enter. And then the last value here is blend. So it's kind of a little bit harder to see in the viewport here, but we can notice it over here on the left side. So this just makes the edges of your spotlight softer. So if I zoom out a little bit, hopefully you can see, even though it's a little blurry here. So if we set it to 0, we have a hard edge on the edges of our spot. As we raise this value up, the edges of our spotlight kind of pull in a little bit and they get a lot softer. So it gives you this nice kind of soft edge. So it's not quite so obvious that you're using a spotlight. We're going to leave ours set to 1. That way we have nice soft edges on this spotlight. Now let's get our light positioned in our scene. Again, I'm going to give you the exact values for this light, but feel free to deviate if you don't like the position that I'm going to show you. So over here on our right side, make sure you bring up your side menu by hitting N, and then go to your item tab. And then for our X location, it's going to be 3.5. The Y location is negative 3.75. Z location is 7. The X rotation is 31.5. The Y rotation is negative 1.5. And then the Z rotation is 45 degrees. So now we can see the position of the light. I went with a sort of top right kind of downward angle here for the light. If you preferred the look of it being directly above your light or above your portal, that's fine. Or if you'd like to adjust any of these values here, by all means. An easy way for you to adjust the angle of your light would be to click on this little tiny yellow dot here. And then you can click on this and just point it at whatever you want the light to point to. So if you point right at the center of your portal, it'll be focused right on the center. Or you can move it off to the sides or wherever you'd like to move it. You could have it just in the foreground. But this would be an easy way for you to kind of re-angle this light. I'm going to Control Z to undo that change because I like the position that I have it in now. Now let's add the last light for a bit of accent color to our scene. We're going to use the rim light as a base for this, so we can select the rim light from our list over here, or just select it behind the portal. And now hit Shift and D, and then X to make a duplicate to the left side, and then we're going to move it just on the X-axis here. Again, I'm going to give you the exact position for this, but feel free to deviate if you'd like. We can go over here to the location. We're going to type in negative 4.3 for the X location. The Y is negative 0.9. And then the Z location is 1.1. In this case, the rotations don't matter at all because it's a perfectly spherical light, but if you'd like to, you can just zero these out, or you can leave the rotations as they are. Now let's adjust the look of this light, and we can do that over here in the Object Data Properties, this little green light bulb. We can click on the color, and we're going to make this basically just pure red. So the only thing we need to change here is just to take this hue slider and slide it all the way to the left, making it pure red. Now we can go down here to the power, and we're going to make it a lot dimmer. We're going to set this down to 1000. Hit enter. And then we're going to change the radius and set this to 1 meter for the radius. So we can see that this red light here just adds some nice accent kind of glow to the volume. So the fog is a little bit more red on this side. It also has these nice kind of red sort of reflections, I guess, on the inside of the stone here. So we're seeing reflections on the cobblestone. It just adds a little bit of variety to the color. With that last light placed, we're completely done lighting our scene. In the next episode, we'll be tackling the animation for our portal. I'll see you there. Don't forget to click the link in the description and comments below for a free month of Skillshare. Watch my classes as well as thousands of others across a wide variety of topics. For the sake of transparency, I do receive a small amount of money if you decide to continue your subscription after that first free month. I truly appreciate the support. If you're enjoying the tutorial series so far, like the video, subscribe, and click the notification bell so you're notified when I release new content just like this.